Blizzard has announced their first set of balance changes for Dragonflight, which is the final set of balance changes before Season 1 releases. I really doubt that they will be doing a big balance pass on the day that the new season launches, so I do think that this is going to be the last balance set before the season starts. I also don't think that there will be any major nerfs once the season has started. I think we will only see buffs. Blizzard has set themselves a bit of a precedent here with the way that they were treating Destruction Warlock and Survival Hunter in Shadowlands. They didn't want to nerf those specs partway through the season because then that might reduce the level of keys that people could do and it would have locked in the 0.1% title. So in general, I think they're going to keep up that trend. They will probably do a lot more balancing in the first, say, 4 to 8 weeks of the season, but it's going to be mostly buffs to those specs which aren't doing well in both Raids and Mythic Plus, I would imagine. We will also probably see this for PvP, but I've got no idea about that. I'm mainly going to be focused on Mythic Plus here, and we're going to go through all of these changes, and we're going to go through my first take on what this means for Mythic Plus, whether it impacts my tier list. I'm not going to update the tier list, but I can tell you what I think in general, whether things are going to go up or down or anything like that, and we'll see what we think. The first thing that Blizzard have mentioned then is that tank specs are getting an additional 100% threat. It was 550, now 650%. That roughly equates to a 15% increase in tank threat. Now, I haven't struggled with any tanks in gaining threat. A lot of these tanks actually do quite a lot of snap on-demand damage. However, there are some specs that are just doing ridiculous damage and probably were pulling threat off the tanks. I just haven't seen it. In general, though, the one thing that I would say about this is that although it's good because it's going to help tanks and it's going to mean that more players are more likely to tank because they're not going to be struggling with threat generation, etc., I think it will also open up the door for kiting, and I don't really like the tank kiting meta as a DPS. There's a few things that sort of frustrate me about it, but in general, I'm not a big fan, and the more threat that tanks can generate, the less time that they actually have to spend in the pack and tanking damage, right? Because they can then pull back, use the threat that they've accumulated to then just keep kiting the mobs. So it will potentially open up the door for that, but in general, I think tanks are pretty sturdy at the minute and they're not actually going to need to do that. So hopefully we don't see that. Demon Hunters then, you can all rejoice. You've managed to make it into the first season without any huge nerfs. These nerfs here are really not that big. So the hunt damage reduced by 10%. Fodder to the Flames trigger rate no longer scales with haste. Both of those, from what I understand, are going to accumulate in about a 3% overall damage reduction in single target, maybe slightly more for AoE. So throughout a dungeon, since the last nerfs as well, so since my tier list was made, there's been 2 sets of nerfs. It'll be something like 8 to 10% damage reduction to Demon Hunter. And to be honest with you, I think that's going to bring them right in line with the likes of Outlaw Rogue, Windwalker Monks, Feral Druids, Demonology Warlocks. Those other really good specs that were up at the very top of A tier, I think it's still going to be doing as much, if not slightly more damage than those. So it doesn't change anything. I still think Demon Hunter is going to be S tier because of the tankiness that it has, the utility that it brings, and doing absolutely premium damage and competing with the best of the best in terms of damage. So you've made it. I really don't think you'll see any huge nerfs once the season starts. They might do a tuning pass like 2 weeks in because they don't think that the highest keys have been achieved yet. But in general, I think we're way more likely to see buffs. So I would try and relax a bit now. You no longer have to be waiting for that huge wall of nerfs where Demon Hunter were just going to get obliterated. That's not going to happen. So you have made it Havoc mains. You're probably going to be a premium DPS for almost all of Season 1, I would imagine. I'm not going to talk about too many tanks or healer changes, but I mean, we can cover things. So Restoration Druid has been hit with a 6% healing reduction on regrowth. In 5-man groups, regrowth isn't that much of your healing, so honestly, that's not going to impact them at all, to be honest. Overall, they're still doing incredible 5-man group healing, and I think they're going to stay very high up in that tier list anyway. Hunters have seen some interesting changes, so Steel Trap damage was reduced by 20%, Explosive Shot damage has been increased by 15%, and Barrage damage has been increased by 15%. I'm fairly confused by this for a couple of reasons. You could take both Steel Trap and Explosive Shot at the same time if you wanted to. Steel Trap was doing decent single target. I don't know whether this is around PvP maybe. Specifically on Hunter, Explosive Shot has been doing a lot of work because of Salvo, so the Explosive Shot buffs here are going to be a massive buff for Hunter specifically. But I didn't really feel like Hunters were doing OP single target damage. I don't know if this is just to try and balance out the capstones potentially, so that Steel Trap wasn't always a mandatory ability to take for single target. Not too sure, but overall they're good changes for Mythic Plus because there's more of a shift into AoE damage here, which is obviously good for M+, but I'm not really sure what the design intent was there. No real overall changes in any of the Hunter specs with these general changes, but okay, we've got them. Marksman, all damage increased by 10%. I don't think that Marksman needed this. I said it in my tier list as well. I genuinely think that Marksman was doing good AoE damage, but not great single target damage whilst in its AoE build. And because of that, I was advocating for single target ability increases, things like Steady Shot, Arcane Shot, trying to bring up its single target. I actually think that Marksman might do, well, I'm almost sure now that Marksman will do the most 8 target damage of any of the Hunter specs. I actually think it will be beating out BrM on 8 targets specifically now, and it probably competes in single target in that AoE build as well, so maybe not, maybe BRM's like slightly ahead. Certainly Survival at its Mythic Plus sort of build where it drops Fury of the Eagle and goes Mongoose Bite. Survival actually looks like it's doing quite a lot of single target, so maybe not, but it's up there and it's competing, and because it's probably just going to bring the most AoE damage on 8 targets, which is most of the packs in Mythic Plus, it might actually mean that Marksman's going to become the premium Hunter spec. I mean, BrM is incredibly good still, it's very simple, so it actually performs really well in most dungeons anyway, so maybe not, but I'm surprised to see this. I definitely think Marksman is roughly right in my tier list still. It's like middle B if I remember, like bottom end of B. It might go slightly up into B, but I don't think it's going to shoot all the way up into A for me. Yeah, in general, I would have liked to see single target changes, but okay, we've managed to get these. Heavy ammo now causes trick shot ricochets to deal an additional 25% damage, was 10%. That has very little bearing on Mythic Plus because you would always be running light ammo, which means that you're going to cleave onto up to 8 targets total. Heavy ammo, however, is going to be incredibly good in low target cleave in raids now, so that's a huge amount of damage that you're gaining on those 3 target fights, so that's very, very strong for raiding if you're really at any low target cleave encounters. Survival, all damage increased by 5%. Again, that's a bit lazy. I would have liked to have seen something to address the Fury of the Eagle versus getting all your Mongoose Bite points, right? I would have liked it to see that you could get both Mongoose Bite and Fury of the Eagle somehow, but nice to have. It's, again, I don't think it's going to change Survival too much. It might have actually pushed it out of D tier for me up into C, but overall I still think Survival is going to be down at the bottom end. I don't think 5% is enough to really change my mind on that. Fire Mage, it got absolutely gutted in the last set of nerfs, which was post my tier list, and that absolutely pretty much ruined the spec for me, where I don't think it was ever going to be good in Mythic Plus. Basically 15%, ignite damage got reduced by 15%. That's pretty much a flat 15% damage reduction to your AoE. Now you're getting 5% back in ignite here, so let's just call it a 10 to 11% damage reduction since when I made my tier list in AoE. You're getting some Pyroblast damage back here, which again funnels your ignite, right? You're getting a bit of Fireball and Scorch, but in general, it's probably still something like a 9 to 10% nerf from where they were, and it probably still wasn't the best Mage spec. It might have been in the right hands, but in general, I think Fire's probably going to be the worst, or at least middle of the pack in terms of the Mage specs. From what I understand now, Arcane Mage is actually pumping in single target, and because I value single target so highly in Mythic Plus and the current dungeon pool, I genuinely think that Arcane could probably be the best Mage spec up there with Frost at least, and then Fire's still going to be the worst. I don't think that these changes are going to change that at all. Brewmaster Monk. Brewmaster's balance now grants 45% increased stamina, was 30%. I don't think that's what Brewmaster needed. I have very little knowledge about tanks, but I've been playing Brewmaster in Mythic Zeros recently, and Brewmaster just has almost zero self-healing. You have Expel Harm, which then uses Gift of the Ox orbs. I would have loved to have seen the healing addressed for Brewmaster. Any other spec that I've played with feels pretty self-sufficient, and then Brewmaster literally just needs to be spam healed when you pull 2 or 3 packs at a time. So I'm a little bit concerned that they're not really addressing the self-healing. Like, stamina is kind of nice with Brewmaster, right? Because then your effective HP is increased, which means it staggers more effective. But in general, I think it needed to be more self-healing. So it's not buffs in the right place for me. I think it should have been in other places. Mistweaver, in general, I don't really know how it plays. I'm not going to comment on any of these. They look like good changes on the face of it, where you're getting more healing that's going to be good in Mythic Plus, right? So you're getting Eulon's is now 5 targets. You're getting Vivify is being increased by 20% on a single target. You're getting Spinning Crane Kick, healing 3 allies for 60% rather than 50%. Like, those all seem good for Mythic Plus, but I have no idea where it was before. I don't know whether it's going to push it up or down. In general, though, that's obviously a benefit. Protection Paladin, Aegis of the Light now grants 50% increased stamina, was 45%, and 30% increased armor, was 15%. That's pretty good for Mythic Plus. In general, Prot Paladin is stacking armor to be able to deal with auto attacks with Shield of the Righteous, etc. So it's a good change for dealing with auto attacks, and obviously that's where most of the damage is really coming from in Mythic Plus. A lot of the time, the high damage is just pulling 2 or 3 packs and then getting hit with auto attacks. So that is very good for that. Priest, I don't think there's anything. Mind Spike now correctly has a visual when damaging enemies. No change to player power. Fixed an issue causing mental decay to not extend the duration of Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch when damage was absorbed. So again, it's just minor changes. There's nothing really there that makes any impact on Mythic Plus. Rogue Assassination Exsanguinate cooldown increased to 3 minutes, was 45 seconds, and bleed effect magnitude reduced to 80%, was 100%. That is a huge nerf to that ability. Exsanguinate was actually quite a big chunk of your single target damage as well, so I'm kind of surprised to see that. I don't think it's huge, but for Mythic Plus specifically, managing to use Exsanguinate onto a priority target would have been great for really hitting a lot of priority damage into a high health and high HP mob, which is really valuable. Now that's only going to be every 5 or 6 packs that you get that, whereas before it was every single pack. So it's not great. It's really not great. It's a pretty big nerf, and I don't think it really changes my opinion on Assassination. I think it's still going to be the premium single target rogue spec in general, I think, and then Sub will be the go-to for like mass AoE, and Outlaw will be the go-to most of the time with its 8 target damage. So I think Assassination will still have a place in the meta, and I genuinely think there might be a few keys, specifically on Tyrannical Weeks where Assassination is going to be run. This doesn't really change that. It's definitely a nerf to single target, but it's not enough to make like Subtlety the best single target version of the rogue specs, I don't think. So it doesn't change its place in ranks within the rogue specs, but I think it's a bit harsh. I don't know if it's necessary for like design space. I mean, they say here, recent data from live and beta indicates that Exsanguinate is drastically overperforming its historic and intended power level. We recognize that this is a heavy nerf for an individual talent, but it's important that Exsanguinate's power be similar to alternative available talent choices. I don't really believe that. There are a lot of specs that have undroppable points in the tree that are mandatory for the spec to perform. I think that Exsanguinate could have been that. I don't necessarily think you just should have made it like central in the tree so you can pick it up from wherever you want, maybe, or you pick it up early on. I don't know. They could have, like, there's many places where that happens. So I sort of disagree with this. I don't think that it should have been nerfed that harshly because of it. So in general, though, it makes no impact in my mind in its place in Mythic Plus. Shaman with weekly restarts, all healing is increased by 5%, acid rain damage increased by 50%. I have no idea whether that's enough, but from what I understood, it was probably one of the weakest healers. That doesn't seem like enough to really push it up to the top. I think that the throughput in 5-man groups just isn't there for Shamans, especially with like spread out healing. So if there's lots of spread players in the group, then it's going to struggle. And like I said, I don't think that's going to change it. Warlock, Soul Leech now converts 3% of damage dealt to an absorb shield, was 6%. So I don't think that changes the cap of Soul Leech, so the damage is going to be the same. You're just not going to have quite as much, and it's not going to be acting, in terms of throughput, it's roughly been halved. So tankiness is getting hit, but Warlock is still incredibly tanky. Arms, fueled by violence, now heals for 8% of the damage dealt by deep wounds, was 65%. That's great for throughput healing again. Protection Warrior has exactly the same change. It's getting more healing from deep wounds, but then Brutal Vitality now adds 15% of the damage dealt to your active Ignore Pain, was 30%. That's a decent nerf, although when you were spamming Ignore Pain in those high rage situations anyway, so when you've got a lot of mobs hitting you and you're generating a lot of rage, it's not really going to be felt, to be honest. But the main change is when you're not in a high rage situation, say on bosses, and this was just contributing to sort of throughput. You're now not going to have as much throughput. So it definitely affects Protection Warrior, but I still think Protection Warrior is going to be premium. It's still going to be right up there. I just think it might be slightly further, more in line with sort of Vengeance in my mind now, being a bit of a heal sink on bosses specifically, where a lot of damage is going out, is not great. You really want to be almost entirely self-sufficient on bosses, so that then the healer can focus on healing other party members because there's so much damage going out. So I do think that this is a nerf that's going to get felt, but I just don't think it's anywhere near enough to knock it from the top. I still think Protection Warrior is going to be right up there, so it's not that much of a hit. That's it then. That's all of the changes for classes that is going to affect Mythic Plus at all. Everything else is changes for PvP or specific changes to Dungeons and Raids. So that's the patch notes. I think it's fairly light touches. The biggest nerfs were to Assassination Rogue in my mind, and the biggest buffs were absolutely to Hunter, which kind of crazy to see. I feel like is going to be in a decent spot now. I think Mage, specifically Fire Mage, needed more. It didn't really need the Ignite nerfs, and I don't know whether it's, again, targeted. You know, Fire Mage has been meta for such a long time. It's been the premium mage spec. It feels like they're trying to push Arcane Mage to become the premium mage spec, which I like. I think that there should be a time for Arcane to be the top dog, and now feels like about the right time. So Fire Mage being further down is of no real issue if you're a mage player. You're going to have other specs that you can play, and which will perform well in Mythic Plus. That's it then. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, I have a Discord linked in the description down below. You can come and ask me any questions that you like. I will always try and answer everything on there. I also would love it if you could subscribe and give me a thumbs up. I am trying to become a full-time content creator. I would love to eventually be able to quit my job, but I have a family to support and I need the revenue. And by far the best way that you can actually support me is just to like the video and subscribe. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And the more subscribers that I get, the closer I am going to be to my goal of being able to quit my job and become a full-time content creator. So that'd be awesome. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed. If you have, we'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.